The history of modern Ireland is inseparable from revolution, division, and the long shadow cast by decisions made under extraordinary pressure. Between the Easter Rising of 1916 and the end of the Irish Civil War in 1923, Ireland experienced a political and social transformation of rare intensity, one that dismantled centuries of British rule, while simultaneously embedding new and unresolved conflicts at the heart of the emerging state. These early years did not merely initiate independence, they defined its character, limits, and enduring contradictions. The struggle that unfolded in this period was not a straightforward war of liberation. It was shaped by competing visions of nationhood, questions of legitimacy and sovereignty, and the deeply entrenched divisions within Irish society itself. The War of Independence transformed a revolutionary ideal into a mass political movement, while the Anglo-Irish Treaty exposed the impossibility of satisfying all aspirations for freedom at once. Partition, often presented as a temporary compromise, instead became a permanent feature of Irish political life, separating communities whose identities, loyalties and fears had long been moving along divergent paths. The Irish Civil War that followed independence was perhaps the most traumatic chapter of all, pitting former comrades against one another and leaving scars that would shape political culture for generations. Its legacy extended far beyond the battlefield, influencing the cautious nature of the new state, the dominance of particular political traditions, and the reluctance to confront unresolved questions about unity, violence, and national identity. By 1916, Ireland had spent decades pursuing self-government through constitutional means. The Irish Parliamentary Party, led by John Redmond, had successfully forced the issue of Home Rule onto the British political agenda, and by 1914 it appeared that limited autonomy within the United Kingdom was finally within reach. Yet Home Rule had been suspended with the outbreak of the First World War, and Ireland was once again asked to wait patiently for reform while sending its sons to fight for the British Empire. The Easter Rising emerged from a deep sense of frustration with this cycle of promise and postponement. A coalition of radical nationalists, cultural revivalists, trade unionists, and militant Republicans concluded that only a dramatic act of rebellion could break Ireland out of political stagnation. Figures such as Patrick Pearse believed that blood sacrifice was not merely inevitable, but transformative, that an act of defiance, even if doomed, would awaken the national spirit. The Rising itself was militarily incoherent and poorly supported. Plans for a nationwide rebellion collapsed, leaving only a few thousand insurgents concentrated largely in Dublin. Over 6 days, in April 1916, they occupied key buildings, most famously the General Post Office, where Pearse read aloud a proclamation declaring an Irish Republic. British forces responded with overwhelming artillery fire, devastating the city centre and forcing the rebels to surrender. Initially, public reaction was hostile. Many Dubliners were furious at the destruction of their city and the loss of civilian life. Yet the British response proved catastrophically misjudged. The execution of 15 rebel leaders, including the severely wounded James Connolly, transformed public opinion. The men who had seemed reckless now appeared noble, dignified, and unjustly killed. The Rising did not create Irish republicanism, but it changed its moral status. Violence in pursuit of independence became not only thinkable, but legitimate in the eyes of many. Equally important, the Rising shattered faith in gradualism. The constitutional path had failed to deliver. Now the language of revolution dominated Irish political life. In the aftermath of 1916, Irish nationalism reorganized itself at remarkable speed. Sinn Féin, a small and marginal party before the Rising, became the vehicle for popular Republican sentiment, despite having played no direct role in the rebellion itself. The British authorities' failure to distinguish between moderate nationalists and radicals only accelerated this process. The period between 1916 and 1919 saw the emergence of a parallel revolutionary state. Irish volunteers were reorganized into a more disciplined force that increasingly identified itself as the Army of the Republic, proclaimed in 1916. Republican courts, local councils and tax systems began to undermine British authority at the grassroots level. The general election of December 1918 marked a decisive rupture. Sinn Féin won a commanding majority of Irish seats, sweeping aside the Irish Parliamentary Party. This was not merely an electoral victory, but a rejection of the entire constitutional framework that had governed Irish politics since the 19th century. When Sinn Féin MPs refused to attend Westminster and instead assembled as Dáil Éireann in Dublin, they asserted that sovereignty flowed from the Irish people, not from the British Crown. This moment is crucial for understanding modern Ireland. The Dáil did not simply declare independence, it claimed democratic legitimacy for revolution. The War of Independence that followed was therefore framed not as rebellion, but as the defense of an already existing state. The War of Independence was a fundamentally asymmetric conflict. The IRA lacked the resources to fight a conventional war, and instead adopted guerrilla tactics that relied on mobility, intelligence, and local support. Michael Collins emerged as the central figure of this phase of the struggle, not because he was the most ideologically driven, but because he understood power, fear, and information. IRA units targeted British soldiers, police, and intelligence operatives, particularly the Royal Irish Constabulary, whose withdrawal from rural Ireland symbolized the erosion of British control. Assassinations and ambushes became routine, while British intelligence networks were systematically dismantled, culminating in the killing of the Cairo Gang on Bloody Sunday in November 1920. British counterinsurgency strategy collapsed under the weight of its own brutality. The Black and Tans and auxiliaries, often poorly disciplined and traumatized veterans, responded to IRA attacks with collective punishment. Towns were burned, civilians beaten, and random shootings became common. Rather than restoring order, these measures radicalized the population and stripped British rule of legitimacy. By 1921, the British state faced a crisis. The war was expensive, internationally embarrassing, and politically unsustainable. At the same time, the IRA was approaching exhaustion, short of weapons, and increasingly reliant on a population already pushed to the brink. The truce declared in July 1921 reflected mutual recognition that neither side could secure outright victory. Ireland's division cannot be understood solely as a byproduct of the treaty negotiations. Partition had deep roots in the island's political and social geography, particularly in Ulster. The northeast was more industrialised, more urban, and more heavily Protestant than the rest of Ireland. Its population included many who identified as British, feared Catholic dominance, and regarded Irish nationalism as both culturally alien and economically threatening. Unionist resistance to Home Rule before 1914 had already demonstrated the willingness of Ulster Protestants to mobilise militarily to remain within the United Kingdom. The British state, faced with the prospect of civil war within the empire itself, increasingly accepted partition as the least disastrous option. The Government of Ireland Act of 1920 formalised this logic, creating Northern Ireland as a self-governing region within the UK. While presented as a temporary compromise, it effectively acknowledged that Ireland contained two incompatible political communities. The Anglo-Irish Treaty of 1921 entrenched this division. The Irish Free State gained substantial autonomy, but at the cost of accepting partition, allegiance to the Crown and British strategic interests. Northern Ireland was given the right to opt out of the Free State, ensuring its continued separation. Partition was not the product of democratic consensus across Ireland, but of exhaustion, fear, and imperial pragmatism. It created a northern state dominated by unionists and a southern state burdened with the knowledge that its independence was incomplete. From the beginning, it was a settlement designed to manage conflict rather than resolve it. The treaty split the Republican movement with extraordinary bitterness. For pro-treaty figures such as Michael Collins, the agreement represented a stepping stone, a pragmatic compromise that secured real power and could be built upon. For anti-treaty Republicans, it represented a fundamental betrayal of the Republic and the dead of 1916. The descent into civil war was rapid and deeply personal. Former comrades, friends, and even family members found themselves on opposing sides. The conflict lacked the moral clarity of the struggle against Britain. It was a war over symbols, principles, and interpretations of legitimacy. The Free State government, backed by Britain, possessed superior weaponry and international recognition. Its decision to execute captured anti-treaty fighters hardened divisions and left a legacy of bitterness that would shape Irish politics for decades. When the war ended in 1923, it did so not with reconciliation, but with silence and exhaustion. The Civil War mattered not only for its immediate destruction, but for the political culture it created. It entrenched a conservative, stability-oriented state, suspicious of radicalism and deeply traumatized by internal conflict. It also froze political alignments that would dominate the Republic for most of the 20th century. The decades following the Civil War were marked by consolidation rather than transformation. The Irish Free State focused on establishing authority, maintaining order, and asserting sovereignty incrementally. Eamon de Valera's eventual rise to power symbolized the absorption of revolutionary legitimacy into constitutional politics. Ireland's neutrality during the Second World War reflected both strategic caution and a desire to assert independence from Britain. Yet the state remained economically weak, socially conservative, and heavily influenced by the Catholic Church. In Northern Ireland, partition hardened into a system of structural inequality. Unionist dominance ensured that Catholic nationalists were marginalized politically and economically, laying the groundwork for future conflict. The border became not just a political boundary, but a psychological one, reinforcing divergent identities. The eruption of violence in Northern Ireland exposed the failure of partition to create stability. Civil rights protests were met with repression, leading to the re-emergence of Republican militancy and the prolonged conflict known as the Troubles. For the Republic, the conflict forced a rethinking of nationalism itself. The old revolutionary narrative proved inadequate in the face of sectarian violence and civilian suffering. Gradually, Irish political culture shifted toward compromise, consent, and constitutionalism. The Good Friday Agreement of 1998 represented a profound departure from the assumptions of 1921. It acknowledged multiple identities, embedded power sharing, and placed the principle of consent at the heart of any future constitutional change. It did not end division, but it transformed how that division was managed. Today's Ireland is wealthier, more secular, and more globally connected than the state imagined by its founders. Yet the shadow of the revolutionary decade remains unmistakable. Commemorations of 1916 reveal an ongoing struggle to reconcile myth and reality, sacrifice and consequence. Partition, once accepted as inevitable, is once again debated, particularly in the context of Brexit and demographic change in Northern Ireland. Unlike in the past, however, the language of unity has shifted from destiny to choice. Modern Ireland was forged in a burst of revolutionary energy between 1916 and 1923. Those years produced independence, division, democracy, and trauma in equal measure. Everything that followed, prosperity, peace, and persistent uncertainty, flows from decisions made under impossible pressure by people who could not see the future they were creating. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe.